Hi. So I just started. Hi, Marcus. I just started reading Lincoln's Melancholy by Joshua Wolf Shenk. The subtitle is How Depression Challenged a President and Fueled His Greatness. I've been really struggling lately, and I found this book recommendation on the Art of Manliness website, and I will try to link it down below. And I read the first chapter, and it's about the extent to which we should, the introduction is describing how much we should dive into the psychology of historical figures like Lincoln. And when I was in college for history, it was much frowned upon to consider the psychology of historical subjects, and Shenk provides a little bit of a description of that in the introduction, but leaves a lot of that historical historiography for and afterwards. You can skip it all. But it got me thinking about a podcast I listened to recently called Missing Richard Simmons. I absolutely hated it because it felt like the guy Dan Taberski, I think, was just like this toxic ex-boyfriend who wouldn't take no for an answer, and he was just diving into the life of Richard Simmons, who is still alive, and it just wouldn't accept that Richard Simmons just wants to be alone. It was this like paternalistic bullshit of, this paternalistic nonsense of deciding that Richard Simmons doesn't know what he wants and doesn't know what is best for him. And as I'm starting to read this book on Lincoln's Melancholy, on this very personal experience that I share, but this very personal experience, and knowing as well that Lincoln didn't really have much of a say in what kinds of letters of his were kept in the historical record, because he was assassinated. I wonder how much of this Lincoln would have wanted to be shared in the way that Richard Simmons just wants people to leave him alone for once in his life. And I guess I'm just thinking about the ethics of biography and of history, not only in relation to Lincoln's Melancholy, but in relation to my family history project. I was talking with my mom that my parents came up to visit a couple Sundays ago and had lunch with us, and I was sharing what I've learned so far, and she was sharing some stories about her grandmother, so my great-grandmother, and all the other characters in that family, and explaining something, providing a little more context for me to understand why I could find an obituary of my great-grandfather, but not one of my great-grandmother, who had already died by the time my great-grandfather had died, and so is referenced as the late wife of Perry. And my mom explained that it was a decision on my great-grandmother's part to disassociate from the Catholic Church and that sense of mortality, I guess, indeed, a lot of my family have chosen to be cremated. The ones who aren't buried in a Catholic cemetery or the Arlington National Cemetery are cremated. And I mean, I'm not going to stop looking up the history of it, but it's just giving me pause, like, what should I share and what shouldn't I share? Should I feel guilty about reading about Lincoln's Melancholy? I certainly didn't feel like missing Richard Simmons was an appropriate ethical choice, ethical project. I don't know. Have you ever thought about this before? Am I completely off the wall again? Or have you read this book? Like, is there anything I should be thinking about when I'm reading it in terms of like this ethics of biography and history? Anyway, I just got questions and thoughts today. Nothing really substantive to share. I hope you've enjoyed watching my dog Marcus play with his favorite squeaky fish. Have a good night.